In the far future, humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had left Earth behind and spread across the stars. What started with small colonies on the Moon and Mars had turned into entire worlds filled with people, cities, and dreams. Humans had built ships that could travel faster than light, connecting hundreds of planets together like shining beads on a string. But with every new planet they found, their curiosity grew stronger. They wanted to see everything, to touch everything, to understand everything. At first, space seemed empty, silent, and endless. The stars looked peaceful, like diamonds scattered in the dark. But as explorers went deeper, they began to find things. Ruins of cities that were not human, strange symbols carved into stone, broken machines that still hummed faintly with unknown energy. The scientists called them echo worlds, because they were full of echoes of civilizations that no longer existed. Some of those ruins were so old that even the dust had turned to crystal. There was something strange about those places. Every ruin told a story, but not through words. The walls were covered with symbols that repeated again and again, no matter the planet or the system. Some looked like eyes. Some looked like spirals swallowing stars. The translation machines struggled to make sense of them, but one meaning came through clearly. Do not awaken them. The message confused people. Who were they? Why should anyone not awaken them? Some scientists said it was just a myth from a lost alien race, like the legends humans told about monsters under the bed. Others believed it was a warning about some dangerous ancient technology. But the most powerful people, the leaders, the explorers, the military, didn't care much about warnings. Humanity had never been good at turning back. They had crossed oceans, climbed mountains, and now crossed galaxies. Fear had never stopped them before, so why should it now? The colonies kept expanding. New worlds were settled every year. The Galactic Council, a loose alliance of humans and a few alien races they had met, tried to keep order. Most of those aliens were peaceful, gentle species who preferred trade and diplomacy. They were amazed by humans, by their speed, their ambition, their fire. But they were also a little afraid of them. Humans were unpredictable. They didn't wait for permission. If there was a mystery, they had to solve it. If there was danger, they wanted to face it. Then came the day that changed everything. A deep space research team found something in a dead system near the edge of known space. It wasn't a planet or a ruin, it was something bigger. A black structure floating between two stars, shaped like a vast twisted ring. It was so old that parts of it had crumbled into dust, but it was still active, glowing faintly with blue light. The team called it the Gate of Shadows. When they scanned it, strange signals began to echo across the nearby systems. It was like a whisper spreading through the void. At first, no one took it seriously. Scientists thought it was a natural phenomenon, maybe radiation or static, but the whispers grew stronger. Ships near the gate started to lose communication. A few went missing. When one ship finally returned, its crew was gone, and its systems were melted from the inside. The ship's logs showed something impossible, an image of a creature made of light and metal staring through the darkness. The footage was blurry, but the eyes, they seemed alive. News spread quickly. Some called it a hoax. Some said humanity had finally found the remains of a god. The Galactic Council panicked and sent warnings. No one should go near the gate, no one should send signals. The alien ambassadors begged humanity to stop investigating, but curiosity is a powerful thing and greed is even stronger. Corporations saw the gate as an opportunity. If it was ancient, it might contain technology worth trillions. Military leaders thought it could be a weapon. Explorers believed it was a path to another galaxy. Every group wanted a piece of it. Soon hundreds of ships surrounded the gate, scanning, drilling, analyzing. They sent drones inside. Most never came back. The few that did returned with fragments of data, shapes, voices, impossible geometries. Then one day the gate opened. It didn't explode or light up like in the movies. It simply unfolded like a flower blooming in slow motion. A wave of energy burst out, washing over every ship nearby. Systems died. Lights flickered. Communications failed. And in the silence that followed, something answered. It wasn't a message. It wasn't even words. It was a feeling, cold, vast, and ancient. Something had woken up. The first signs were small. Navigation systems started picking up impossible readings. Ghost signals appeared on every channel. Ships began to vanish, not just destroyed but erased as if they had never existed. The few survivors spoke of shadows moving between stars. of fleets that appeared for seconds and then disappeared again. Scientists tried to explain it, but there were no explanations left. It took weeks before the truth was clear. The gate wasn't just a doorway. It was a prison. And when humanity opened it, they didn't discover something. They freed it. The Varith had returned. No one knew what the Varith really were. The data was too fragmented, the ruins too old. But from the little that was known, they were not a single species. They were a swarm, a fusion of machine and mind created long ago by another civilization that had tried to conquer death itself. The Varith had learned to consume, to absorb, to evolve. They had once ruled the galaxy until they destroyed everything, even themselves. The survivors of that ancient war had sealed them behind the Gate of Shadows. And now, because of human curiosity, they were free again. At first, the Galactic Council begged for unity. They wanted to seal the gate, to run, to hide, but the Varith moved too fast. Their ships were like living metal, bending and twisting through space. They didn't invade, they devoured. Planets vanished, leaving behind only silence. Entire species disappeared within days. Humanity watched it all unfold from afar. Some leaders wanted to flee and protect the core worlds. Others wanted to fight. But as reports came in, fleets gone, colonies lost, the truth became impossible to ignore. The galaxy was dying, and the warnings on those ancient ruins had been true. Still, even as fear spread, there was one thing the Varith did not understand. Humanity had always been stubborn. They were reckless, emotional, and often foolish, but they were survivors. Every step of their history, from the caves of prehistory to the stars, had been built on struggle. So while the rest of the galaxy trembled and prayed for mercy, humanity began to prepare. Factories shifted from building colonies to building warships. Scientists who once searched for knowledge now built weapons. Soldiers trained not for glory but for extinction-level war. The whispers in the dark grew louder, but so did humanity's resolve. They didn't know if they could win, but they knew one thing for certain: they would not beg. As the first Varith fleets began to cross into human space, the colonies lit up with the glow of defense grids. The stars that had once been symbols of hope became battlefields waiting to happen. The great silence of space was about to break, not with words, not with mercy, but with fire. And so in that quiet moment before the storm, humanity stood on the edge of something greater than any war they had ever fought. They had awakened a sleeping nightmare, and the galaxy cried out for help. But humanity, as always, had only one answer. They tightened their armor, loaded their guns, and prepared for what was coming. The galaxy might have begged for mercy, but humanity would answer with war. The first signs of change came quietly, like a whisper lost in the wind. At first, the strange signals that echoed through deep space didn't seem dangerous.
Scientists said they were just background noise, static from dying stars or interference from old satellites.
But deep down, some people felt uneasy. There was something different about these signals. They didn't behave like normal energy waves. They moved with rhythm, like a heartbeat or maybe a pulse. And every few hours, the pulse repeated, stronger each time, spreading farther across the galaxy. Soon, communication systems started acting strange. Ships traveling near the Gate of Shadows began reporting malfunctions. Messages that were sent between colonies arrived distorted, filled with symbols no one could translate. Sometimes the signals sounded like voices, whispering in languages that no living being could understand. Then came the disappearances. Whole fleets, thousands of people gone without a trace. At first, people blamed pirates, black holes, or simple accidents. But then it happened to the Council ships, the alien fleets that had joined humanity in exploring the galaxy. Their last transmissions were full of screams, alarms, and one chilling word repeated over and over again: awakened. The Galactic Council called for an emergency meeting. Every major species sent their leaders to the shining orbital station of Halion Prime. The air was thick with fear. Holograms of destroyed planets filled the room. No one could explain what was happening. The only thing everyone agreed on was that something had been released, and it was spreading fast. The alien representatives begged humanity to close the Gate of Shadows, to stop sending ships near it, to seal it forever. Some species even offered to destroy their own warplanes to isolate that region of space. But humans were not ready to give up. The scientists argued that closing the gate might trap valuable information inside. The generals said that understanding what had come through was the key to fighting it. The politicians feared that if humanity turned away, Someone else would seize the knowledge first. The aliens couldn't understand this. They were desperate to survive while the humans were still trying to learn and control. That difference, that human need to push forward no matter the cost, would soon shape the fate of the entire galaxy. Within weeks, colonies started to fall silent. On the planet Zyra 7, settlers vanished overnight. On the mining world of Darnus, workers saw lights in the sky, thousands of small, glowing orbs moving in perfect formation. They thought it was just a meteor shower until the lights changed direction and descended. The last message from Darnus was a single transmission. They are here. Then, across the stars, every telescope, every radar, every scanning system began to pick up shapes, massive, moving shadows between the stars. They didn't use engines or fuel. They glided silent and smooth, their surfaces shifting like liquid metal. The Vareth had awakened. No one had seen creatures like them before. They weren't entirely alive, but they weren't machines either. They looked like ships at first, dark, enormous, shaped like blades, but when they moved, they pulsed, breathed, and shimmered. When they attacked, they didn't use energy weapons or bullets. They consumed. Everything they touched, metal, rock, even light, was absorbed into them. Whole planets vanished into their darkness. The Council sent a peace message, even though no one was sure if the Vareth could even understand. It was a simple plea, broadcast across all frequencies in every known language. We mean no harm. We wish to coexist. For a while, there was silence. Then, one by one, the communication satellites that sent the message started shutting down. The next thing anyone knew, the system that sent the message was gone, burned into ashes. That was their answer. The galaxy panicked. Refugees filled the warp gates, fleeing from the outer colonies to the core worlds. Planets that had once been rich with trade and life turned into ghost towns overnight. Alien species that had lived in peace for centuries now turned on each other, fighting for ships, for food, for a way out. In the middle of the chaos, humanity stood divided. Some leaders demanded retreat. They wanted to seal Earth and the inner colonies behind defense grids and let the rest of the galaxy fall. Others believed running was pointless. They argued that if the Vareth could consume worlds, then nowhere was safe. Humanity would have to fight not just for themselves, but for everyone. The decision tore the human government apart. Some fleets left to defend Earth. Others stayed in deep space to study the Vareth, to find weaknesses. The scientists discovered something horrifying. The energy coming from the Vareth fleets matched the readings from the Gate of Shadows. It meant the creatures were connected to it. As long as the gate existed, the Vareth would keep coming, but by then it was too late. The gate was growing. Every day the dark ring expanded a little more, feeding on the energy it had consumed. The glowing blue cracks across its surface began to pulse with life as if it were breathing. Inside the ring, the darkness wasn't empty anymore, it was moving. Shapes twisted within it like shadows of wings and claws stretching into the light. The scientists finally understood. The gate wasn't just a door. It was alive. More species joined the Council's plea. They begged humanity to destroy the gate before it was too strong. They cried over the loss of their homes, their families, their worlds. But the humans who had studied the gate knew that destroying it might trigger something worse. They didn't know if the Vareth could be contained or if they would simply burst through in greater numbers. The galaxy begged for mercy. Messages flooded every channel, calls for help, promises of alliance, even surrender. But no help came. The Vareth didn't negotiate. They didn't demand tribute or control. They simply advanced, system by system, swallowing everything. It was then that humanity began to change. For generations, humans had been explorers, builders, dreamers. But now they had to become something else. They began preparing for war. The great shipyards on Mars, Titan, and the colonies of Vega stopped producing trade vessels and started building warships. Massive cruisers armed with weapons no alien race had ever seen. Entire moons were turned into factories. Artificial intelligences were redesigned to think like generals. Every able person was drafted. There were no longer civilians or soldiers. Everyone became part of the defense. As the Vareth fleets moved closer, the first battles began. They weren't really battles, they were massacres. Human and alien fleets fought side by side, but their weapons barely scratched the enemy. The Vareth ships didn't explode when hit. They simply melted, reshaped, and came back stronger. The only way to destroy one completely was to use antimatter, and even then the fragments tried to reform. Still, humanity refused to back down. Each defeat became a lesson. Each destroyed fleet became a test of strategy. Engineers worked day and night, turning lost colonies into laboratories. Pilots learned to fight not by brute force but by tricking the enemy, using gravity wells, supernova explosions, and space-time traps to slow them down. It was during one of these desperate defenses that humanity's message to the galaxy changed. Instead of asking for help, the human leader, Admiral Kira Solis, sent a transmission that was broadcast to every surviving world. If they come for us, we fight. If they burn our worlds, we rebuild. If they take our sky, we take it back. We are human. We do not beg. We do not kneel. We answer with war. The speech spread like wildfire. For the first time, the galaxy stopped crying for mercy. The alien races who had once looked down on humanity now looked to them for hope. The humans were fighting not just for Earth but for every species still alive. Even as their fleets burned, they refused to retreat. They started building a wall of defense around the core worlds, thousands of ships linked together by energy fields, forming a living barrier. They called it the Iron Veil. Behind it, survivors from hundreds of species found refuge. Humanity became the shield of the galaxy, the last wall between life and extinction. But no one forgot how it started. The whispers, the curiosity, the arrogance, it had all led to this. The same hands that had opened the gate were now the ones holding the line. The galaxy that once begged for mercy now waited for humanity to decide its fate. And humanity, scarred but unbroken, had already made its choice. They would fight, even if it meant their end. In the cold, dark emptiness of space, as the Vareth fleets gathered like storm clouds, the humans stood ready. The stars flickered in the distance, reflecting off the steel of their ships. The soundless void was filled with only one thought, one promise echoing across every human heart. The galaxy may beg, but humanity will never bow. Humanity had changed. The people who once dreamed of exploring the stars now built machines of war. The shining colonies that once welcomed travelers were now covered with shields, cannons, and warning lights. Space, which once felt like a sea of hope, had turned into a battlefield waiting to happen. The message was clear. The time for peace was over. Humanity had decided to fight. Factories across the galaxy stopped making homes and ships for trade. They became forges of war. Moons were turned into giant shipyards. Oceans on some planets were drained to make space for underground bunkers. The great rings of Saturn became weapon testing sites. Everywhere humanity prepared. Children learned emergency drills before they learned to read. Entire families worked together to build warships. The stars glowed not from beauty anymore, but from the endless flames of engines and explosions. Leaders from every human colony united under one name, the Terran Defense Network. It wasn't a government. It was something stronger, a promise that no matter what, they would stand together. For the first time in centuries, humans forgot about borders, politics, and money. They had one enemy, one goal, and one fight: to survive. The first step was rebuilding the fleets that had been destroyed by the Vareth. Engineers studied the remains of lost ships and learned how to adapt. They designed new weapons that could burn through the strange living metal of the Vareth. They called them plasma lances, long beams of white-hot energy that could pierce even the toughest hull. They also created shield systems that changed frequency constantly, so that the Vareth couldn't absorb their energy. Humans had always been good at learning, and this time they learned from their pain. Training centers opened everywhere. Pilots were taught to think like machines, fast, precise, and without fear. Soldiers were trained to fight in zero gravity. Engineers learned to fix ships while floating in space. Every human knew that the next battle could come at any time. Some feared death. Others embraced it. But none turned away. The first real test came in the Vega system. The Vareth had begun consuming its outer planets, turning them into fuel. Humanity sent a fleet of 50 warships to stop them. The battle lasted 3 days and 3 nights. When it ended, only 12 human ships were left. The Vareth retreated, but the cost was enormous. Vega's skies burned for weeks. The survivors said the light of the battle could be seen from 10 systems away. Yet in that loss, humanity found hope. For the first time, the Vareth had been forced to retreat. It wasn't victory, but it was proof that the enemy could bleed. The story of Vega spread across the galaxy. Even alien races who had hidden in fear began to believe again. They saw that the humans would not stop fighting, no matter the odds. Soon, the war grew larger. The Terran Defense Network launched a campaign called Operation Dawnfire. Their goal was not to defend but to strike. They wanted to take the fight into Vareth territory. Fleets of thousands of ships began moving across the stars, burning everything that the enemy had corrupted. Planets that had fallen were destroyed completely, not to kill but to make sure the Vareth could never feed on them again. It was a terrible thing, but humanity had learned that mercy had no place in this war. On every planet, stories of bravery and sacrifice began to spread. There was the story of Captain Leon Mercer, whose ship, the Astra's Edge, rammed itself into a Vareth mothership to save a colony of 10 million people. There was the tale of the engineers of Titan, who stayed inside a reactor during meltdown to finish building a new defense cannon. Their actions cost them their lives, but their cannon saved dozens of worlds. These stories became legends, giving strength to those still fighting. But victory always came with pain. For every world saved, another was lost. Entire colonies went dark, and sometimes no one even knew their names anymore. Space became a graveyard of metal and silence. The war stretched on, year after year, and the stars seemed dimmer with every passing season. The aliens of the Galactic Council watched in awe and fear. They had begged for peace once, but now they saw what humanity was capable of. The humans fought with a kind of madness, a fire that refused to die. They didn't fight because they wanted power. They fought because they couldn't imagine giving up. Slowly, the Council began to follow their lead. Alien fleets joined the humans. Together, they formed a new alliance, the Galactic Union Defense Pact. But everyone knew who led it: humanity. With the help of their allies, humanity built new superweapons. Massive warships called dreadnoughts were created, floating cities armed with enough firepower to destroy moons. The most famous of them was the Resolute Dawn, commanded by Admiral Kira Solis, the same woman whose speech had given the galaxy hope. Her ship became a symbol. Wherever the Resolute Dawn appeared, soldiers fought harder, enemies faltered, and people believed again. Still, the Vareth were unlike any foe ever faced. Every time humanity destroyed one of their ships, the enemy learned. Their designs changed. Their attacks adapted. It was like fighting a storm that grew stronger with every strike. The humans called it the Living War. They realized that they couldn't just defeat the Vareth, they had to outthink them. So humanity began using tactics no other species would dare. They turned dying stars into traps. They lured Vareth fleets into unstable systems and detonated suns, sacrificing entire worlds to destroy the enemy. They built bombs the size of planets, and they unleashed them without hesitation. It was brutal. It was terrifying. But it worked. The galaxy started to change again. The Vareth stopped advancing. For the first time in years, there was silence at the edge of known space. Humanity had pushed them back, one burning world at a time. But peace was still far away. Every soldier knew that this was only the beginning. Inside the Terran High Command, the mood was grim. The leaders knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Every victory drained their resources. Every battle cost millions of lives. Yet giving up was not an option. They decided to go deeper, to find the source of the Vareth, the heart of their hive. Intelligence reports pointed to a region of dark space where even light could not escape. They called it the Epsilon Verge. That was where the Vareth Prime Mind was believed to exist, the core consciousness controlling the swarm. Preparing for that final battle took years. Entire systems were dedicated to building weapons powerful enough to reach the Verge. New ships were created with armor so thick that they could fly through stars. The scientists called them Judgment-class cruisers. Every person in the fleet knew that going there might be a one-way trip, but no one hesitated. They had already lost too much to stop now. As humanity gathered its greatest army in history, the rest of the galaxy watched in silence. The aliens who had once begged for mercy now sent what little they had to support the humans. Supply ships, fighters, fuel, even food. Everything went to the Terran fleets. Humanity had become the shield and sword of every living being. Before they departed, Admiral Solis sent one final transmission to all allied worlds. Her voice was calm, strong, and full of the fire that had carried humanity through the darkest times. "We were born from a world that taught us to fight for every breath," she said. "Now we fight for every world that still breathes. If we fall, remember us not as conquerors but as guardians." The galaxy begged for mercy. We answered with war, not to destroy but to save. Then the fleets left. Thousands of ships, their engines glowing like suns, vanished into the darkness beyond the stars. Families watched from distant planets, knowing many would never return. Children looked up at the night sky, whispering silent prayers to the heroes they might never see again. And as the ships reached the edge of the galaxy, the first Vareth fleets appeared, hundreds of them, waiting, silent, endless. The humans powered their weapons. The decks hummed with energy, and for a moment, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The war that had turned humans from explorers into warriors was about to reach its greatest test. The machines of the Vareth had no mercy. The humans needed none, for in their hearts they carried the same message that had echoed since the beginning. The galaxy begged for mercy, but humanity would answer with war. The war had reached its breaking point. After 20 long years of fighting, the stars themselves seemed tired. Every system carried scars of battle. Broken moons, shattered ships, and planets reduced to dust. The galaxy had gone quiet, not because peace had returned, but because so much had been lost. Humanity had fought harder than anyone thought possible. They had burned through their fuel, their resources, and their lives. But they had not stopped. Now the final battle was about to begin. The Terran fleets had gathered near the Epsilon Verge, the darkest corner of known space. It was said that light itself disappeared there, swallowed by something alive. No one who had ever gone into that region had returned. The readings showed impossible gravity waves, and space itself seemed to twist and breathe. That was where the Vareth Prime Mind waited, the heart of the swarm, the brain that controlled every ship, every machine, every thought of the enemy. Inside the command deck of the Resolute Dawn, Admiral Kira Solis stared out at the black horizon. Her eyes were calm, though she hadn't slept in days. Around her, hundreds of officers moved between glowing screens, monitoring thousands of ships. Everyone knew this was the end. There would be no retreat. Either the Vareth would fall or humanity would vanish forever. "Signal the fleet," she said softly. "It's time." Across the galaxy, her words were transmitted to every ship, every pilot, every soldier. They were simple words, but they carried the weight of everything humanity had become. We fight for the living. We fight for the fallen. And we do not stop until the dark is gone. Then the fleet moved forward. The stars disappeared behind them as they crossed into the verge. It was like flying into a storm made of shadows. The sensors flickered and failed. The ship's metal creaked as invisible forces pulled at them. Then out of the darkness the Vareth appeared. They came in waves, thousands of ships shaped like knives and serpents, glowing with cold white light. They didn't move like normal fleets. They twisted through space as if the laws of physics didn't exist. Their weapons were not lasers or missiles. They were streams of energy that tore through space-time itself. Entire human ships vanished in flashes of light, erased from existence, but humanity did not break. They fired back with everything they had. Plasma lances, nuclear missiles, and antimatter warheads filled the void. Explosions bloomed like stars being born. Every second was chaos. Ships collided. Fighters danced between wreckage, and voices shouted through broken radios. The Resolute Dawn led the charge, cutting through the enemy lines like a burning spear. Its hull was scarred, its shields flickered, but it kept going. Admiral Solis stood on the bridge, surrounded by smoke and alarms. "Target the central cluster," she ordered. "That's where the mind is!" The Vareth reacted instantly. Massive ships the size of continents emerged from the black mist, surrounding the human fleet. Their surfaces shimmered like liquid metal, changing shape as they absorbed every shot fired at them. One of them struck the Resolute Dawn, ripping a hole through its lower decks. Hundreds of crew members were lost in seconds, but the ship did not stop. The engineers sealed the breach with emergency shields, and the guns kept firing. The battle went on for hours. There was no time to count losses, no time to rest. The communication lines were filled with desperate voices, mixed with screams, static, and orders. "Squadron 9, fall back. We've lost contact with the Horizon Blade."
"Engine fire on deck 3.
Every word carried death, but every voice kept fighting. Then through the storm of energy and wreckage, the humans saw it. The Vareth Prime Mind. It was not a ship. It was not even a being that could be understood. It was a structure bigger than a moon, pulsing with dark light, floating in the center of the verge. Its surface was covered in billions of moving parts, like veins of living metal. It looked alive, breathing, watching, and in the middle of it all was a glowing core shining like a dying star. That was the heart of the swarm. The resolute Dawn and the remaining fleets gathered every bit of power they had. They had one weapon left, one they had never dared to use, the stellar lance. It was a weapon of pure antimatter energy, powerful enough to destroy an entire star system. It had taken 50 years to design, and firing it could collapse the ship itself. But there was no choice left. Admiral Solace looked at the image of the Prime Mind on her screen. For a moment she said nothing. Her crew waited. Then she whispered, "For every world they took." "Charge the stellar lance," said the weapons officer. The lights across the ship dimmed as all power was redirected to the weapon. The engines shut down. The shields weakened. Every ounce of energy was poured into one final shot. Outside, the Vareth began to swarm around them, sensing the threat. Thousands of enemy ships closed in, firing relentlessly. The hull of the Resolute Dawn cracked, alarms blared, and fires spread across its decks. But the weapon kept charging. On the bridge, the crew held their positions even as explosions shook the floor. One officer, his face covered in blood, said, "Admiral, shields are gone." "I know," she replied. "Hold steady." The energy meter reached full charge. The stellar lance was ready. "Fire," Solace said. The beam erupted from the front of the Resolute Dawn like a sun tearing through darkness. It was blinding, pure white energy cutting through space, hitting the Vareth Prime Mind directly. For a moment, everything went silent. The stars disappeared. The beam kept growing, pushing deeper into the creature's core. Then suddenly the Prime Mind screamed. The sound wasn't heard through radios. It vibrated through the very air, through the ships, through every living being. It was the sound of something ancient dying. The explosion that followed was beyond imagination. The entire verge lit up like a second universe being born. Waves of energy ripped across space, tearing through the Vareth fleets, disintegrating them instantly. The Resolute Dawn and the human fleets were caught in the blast. Systems overloaded, engines failed, and one by one, ships disappeared into the light. When the light finally faded, there was nothing left. The Vareth were gone. The dark energy that once filled the verge had vanished. The stars shone again, faint but clear. For the first time in decades, the galaxy was silent. Rescue fleets arrived days later. They found wreckage scattered across millions of kilometers. Out of thousands of ships, only a few survived, most of them heavily damaged. The Resolute Dawn was gone. No signal, no trace. Only the faint echo of the final transmission Admiral Solace had sent before the explosion. "If humanity falls, let it be remembered, we did not run. We stood." When news of the victory reached the surviving worlds, the galaxy wept. It wasn't a victory filled with cheers. It was quiet, heavy, and full of sorrow. Billions were dead. Entire species had vanished. But the Vareth were no more. Humanity had paid the highest price possible. Earth itself had lost contact with half its colonies. Whole generations had grown up knowing nothing but war. But even in their grief, the survivors knew they had done what no one else could. The galaxy had begged for mercy, and humanity had answered. Not with kindness, but with courage, fire, and sacrifice. The ruins of the Resolute Dawn were never found, but its name became legend. In every human city, children learned about the ship and the people who fought on it. The story spread to alien worlds too. Monuments were built on countless planets, carved with the same words that Admiral Solace had once spoken. For every world they took. The Epsilon Verge, where the final battle had taken place, was renamed the Silent Sea. No one dared to travel there again. The stars around it burned brighter than before, as if honoring those who had fallen. Scientists said the explosion had left behind something strange, a single pulse of energy that repeated every year, like a heartbeat. Many believed it was the echo of the Resolute Dawn, a reminder that even in death humanity still stood watch. In the years that followed, the galaxy began to rebuild. But nothing would ever be the same. The war had changed everyone. The aliens who had once feared humanity now treated them with respect and awe. The humans themselves had learned a truth that they would never forget. Mercy is precious, but survival sometimes demands fire. The war had ended with silence, but that silence was not empty. It was filled with the memory of courage, of pain, of people who refused to kneel. The stars were still scarred, but they shone brighter than ever before. Humanity had saved the galaxy, not because they were stronger, But because they refused to stop fighting, even when all hope was gone, and though Admiral Solace and her ship were lost forever, her legacy lived on in every soldier, every planet, every sunrise that came after. The galaxy would rebuild and life would go on. But somewhere, in the quiet of space, her final words still echoed across the stars. We stood. The war was finally over. The stars that had once burned with explosions were calm again. Space, which had echoed with screams and gunfire, had fallen into silence. The Vareth were gone, destroyed in the final battle at the Epsilon Verge. But victory did not bring joy. It brought a quiet sadness heavy like the cold of space. Humanity had survived, but at a cost that could never be forgotten. The once bright colonies now floated as ruins. Millions of ships were gone, and billions of people would never come home. Many planets had turned into empty rocks, their surfaces blackened by war. The Galactic Council tried to rebuild communication across systems, but most of the networks were broken. Some colonies didn't even know the war had ended. They still prepared for enemies that no longer existed. The silence of peace felt strange. Humanity had changed forever. Before the war, they had been explorers, dreamers, and builders. Now they were something else, tougher, colder, wiser. They had looked into the darkest part of the universe and survived. They had lost their innocence, but they had found their strength. In the ruins of Earth's orbit, the Terran Defense Network held its final meeting. The surviving leaders appeared through holograms, their faces tired and older. Many of them had lost everything, their families, their homes, their worlds. But they spoke with pride. Humanity had stood when no one else would. They had fought for every race, not just for themselves. Now they had to decide what would come next. Some wanted to rebuild their fleets and become the guardians of the galaxy forever. Others wanted to lay down their weapons and return to peace. In the end, they agreed that war should never be the answer again. The weapons would be dismantled, and the factories that once built destruction would now build life. Humanity would not forget what they had done, but they would not let it define them. The first great project of peace was built near the center of the galaxy. It was called the Monument of Stars. It wasn't made of gold or metal, but of light. Thousands of satellites formed a massive symbol visible even from distant worlds, a shining spiral that represented unity. Every lost planet, every fallen soldier, every vanished species was named in the records stored within it. People from every race came to visit, to remember those who had given everything so that others could live. Children born after the war would grow up hearing stories of the Resolute Dawn, of Admiral Kira Solis, and of the final stand at the Epsilon Verge. They would learn about the courage of the engineers on Titan, the pilots of Vega, and the miners who turned asteroids into weapons. To them, these people were not just heroes. They were proof that even when all light fades, humanity can still burn like a star. But peace was not simple. Not everyone saw humanity as saviors. Some alien species looked at what humans had done and felt fear instead of gratitude. They remembered the burning of worlds, the antimatter storms, and the terrifying power of the stellar lance. To them, humanity was dangerous, too strong, too willing to destroy. Rumors spread through the galaxy, whispers that humanity had become what the Vareth once were, unstoppable, merciless, and proud. Humanity understood these fears. They didn't try to deny them. Instead, they stayed quiet and rebuilt in their own way. They didn't send armies anymore. They sent doctors, teachers, and engineers to help other species recover. Where once their ships carried weapons, now they carried supplies. Slowly, trust began to return. The galaxy began to believe that humanity didn't fight for conquest, but for survival and freedom. On Earth, life slowly came back to normal, though normal meant something new now. Cities rebuilt from the ashes were filled with memories of those who never returned. Statues of nameless soldiers stood in every capital. Even small towns had walls carved with the names of the fallen. Every night, people looked up at the sky, not with fear but with quiet respect. They knew what it had cost to keep those stars shining. Generations passed. The first soldiers of the Vareth War became legends. Songs were written about them and their names became part of history. But even as time moved on, humanity never forgot the lesson they had learned in the fire of war. That mercy and strength could exist together. But mercy alone could not save the galaxy. In one of the rebuilt observatories on Mars, a young student once asked her teacher a question. Why did we fight when the others begged for mercy? The teacher looked at her for a long moment, then smiled sadly. Because someone had to, he said. And sometimes when mercy fails, courage must answer. The Monument of Stars became a place of pilgrimage for many. People of every race visited it. Some came to mourn, others to pray. Inside its glowing halls, the silence felt sacred. The stories of the war were recorded there in every known language, so that no one would ever forget how close the galaxy had come to ending. At the very center of the monument was a single phrase carved in pure light. When the galaxy begged for mercy, humanity answered with war. It wasn't meant as a boast. It was a reminder, a promise that the next time darkness came, someone would stand again. Humanity had not fought for glory. They had fought because they could not stand by and watch others fall. That was their nature, the same nature that once led them to explore the stars, to build cities in the sky, and to awaken the Varith by mistake. That same fire that had caused destruction had also saved the galaxy. Centuries later, historians would argue about humanity's place in the universe. Some would say they were heroes who saved creation. Others would call them monsters who nearly destroyed it. But all agreed on one thing. Without them, there would be no galaxy left to argue about. On the anniversary of the final battle each year, all communication networks across the galaxy went silent for 1 minute. No ships flew, no signals were sent, no voices spoke. The silence was a tribute to the dead, and to the humans who had stood when the galaxy could not. Even after hundreds of years, traces of the war remained. Some parts of space were still dangerous, filled with the wreckage of battles long past. The remains of the Variath Prime Mind still drifted in the blackness near the Silent Sea. Scientists who dared to study it found strange pulses of energy, like a sleeping heartbeat. They said it was harmless, just a leftover vibration from the explosion. But sometimes when the stars were quiet, explorers swore they could hear faint whispers like the echo of something waiting. Still, humanity didn't fear it. They had faced worse. If the darkness ever returned, they knew what to do. They would stand again, because that was who they were. Not conquerors, not destroyers, but protectors who fought for life itself. Back on Earth, in a small memorial garden near what had once been the United Nations building, there stood a statue of Admiral Solace. She was not shown holding a weapon or giving an order. She was shown looking up at the sky, her hands open as if reaching for the stars she had saved. At her feet were the words she answered. Visitors came from every corner of the galaxy to see it. Some brought flowers, others brought pieces of broken starship hulls, relics of the war. Children played around it, laughing in the sunlight, unaware of how much blood had been spilled for their peace. Their laughter was the truest victory humanity had ever achieved. Over time, humanity returned to exploring again, but this time with humility. They still built ships and traveled to new worlds, but they did so carefully. They studied the past not to control it, but to understand it. They knew that curiosity without caution could awaken horrors again. When new civilizations rose among the stars, they heard stories of the ancient war, the time when the galaxy almost died. Some thought it was just a myth. Others believed every word. Either way, they knew one truth. There was once a species that refused to bow, even when the universe itself trembled. And in that truth, humanity lived forever, not as rulers, not as saviors, but as a reminder that courage can exist even in the darkest night. Far beyond the Monument of Stars, near the quiet border of the Silent Sea, a single human probe still drifted through the blackness. It had no crew, no weapons, and no orders. Its lights blinked faintly, sending one repeating signal into the void. No one knew who had programmed it, but its message was simple and eternal. We stood. We will stand again. And so the galaxy moved on. Stars were born, civilizations rose and fell, and the wounds of war healed slowly. But the memory of humanity, the species that answered the galaxy's cry with unshakable fire, remained carved into the fabric of space itself. For as long as there were stars to shine, their story would never die.